Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm joined, please to say, as ever, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow and World Historian, Amy Gallagher of New Culture Forum and, of course, of Stand Up to Woke, and Dr. Philip Kiszely, Senior Fellow and Cultural Historian, or all the historians. Before actually we go into today's look at the news, just one thing. This past week, we had our Smith Lecture, something we hold every year. You might have been to one before. We've had great people, Dr. Murray, Nigel Farage, David Saki. And this time it was with the right-wing campaigner, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Now, for my money, it was one of the best ones we've done. Full house. And many people couldn't get to see it, but don't fear, because we're going to be showing it on the channel tomorrow, Sunday tomorrow, at 10 o'clock. But just to give you a little taster, Ollie, would you give us a little clip? Thanks.
On the other side are the champions of identity politics. Sometimes they call it multiculturalism, and other times they insist on cultural pluralism, and now it's simply diversity. For the proponents of diversity, the nation state is made up of groups of individuals along lines of ethnicity, religion, race, gender, transgender, class, sexuality, sexual orientation, rural or urban, and much else. Group loyalty supersedes loyalty to the nation state. They seek, quote, social justice for groups, not for individuals. Justice, according to the multiculturalists, is not blind, but biased for and against certain groups. It's always zero-sum. For instance, they argue that white heterosexual males are privileged by the system, while Black or ethnic minorities are victims of discrimination because they had no say in the evolution of the structures and institutions of the Western nation state. Justice can therefore not be blind because the system is rigged, but must be corrected for historic and systemic biases against races, ethnicities, women, and other minorities. To achieve this social justice for all groups, we must expand the administrative government, that's the bureaucracy, to develop and enforce rules, regulations, directives, and guidelines of diversity, equity, and inclusion within every conceivable institution, public and private.
Yeah, so that is 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on this channel. So stay tuned for that. Before we actually do look at the news, we have a lot of locals to actually announce, don't we, Rafe?
Yes, in the run-up to Christmas, we've got quite a number of events going across the country at our various NCF locals branches. So if you live in or near any of these cities, please do stay tuned. Saturday, the 3rd of November, which is today, the day that this goes out at 7 p.m., Connor Tomlinson, host of our show, Deprogram, will be speaking in Canterbury. And then on Monday, the 2nd of December, there'll be a Salisbury Christmas meetup. On the 5th of December in Lincoln, there'll be the last meeting before Christmas. On Friday, December the 6th, there'll be an Edinburgh meetup where they'll be discussing human rights, human roles, Roger Scruton on moral relativism. The 8th of December in Carlisle. And then on the 10th of December, there are a whole raft of things going ahead. On the 10th of December, we'll be in Brighton, in Newcastle, in Sheffield, in Southend-on-Sea, and in Wellingborough. And then last but not least, on Thursday, the 12th of December, in Southampton. So if you live near any of those places, please do send an email to locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. That's locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. It's a great way to meet other people who are like yourself, to have a chat about any topic under the sun. And of course, I'm sure just before Christmas, it should be especially festive and convivial.
Right, thank you, Rafe. Well, actually, a lot of great interesting things happening next year with locals, actually. But we won't say any more about that for the time being. I'm going to start this week by talking about this outfit. You probably know about BBC Verify, which is a fact-checking outfit at the BBC. It's got about 60 people who work for it. It's getting into more and more hot water. But I think what I should do is read out what they're meant to do before we talk about it, because it's suddenly become sort of quite topical this week. And so, without further ado, here we go. The aim of BBC Verify is to provide impartial, independent analysis and information to audiences using a range of sources. Well, Amy, I mean, that sounds a bit like what a journalist should be doing to me, but anyway.
Exactly. I mean, most of us all that what the BBC should be doing anyway. But of course, it's falling foul of its own misinformation and fact-checking services anyway. I mean, the most recent example of this was in relation to the inheritance tax. I think it claimed that only 500 farmers will be affected by the inheritance tax. And actually, people have come out and said, well, no, probably tens of thousands looking at the statistics. And I think this fact went on to be repeated by politicians, but possibly Keir Starmer believes that he repeated this because the BBC had verified it as a fact. That's how powerful, it is. But I think just generally the idea of the BBC having this kind of misinformation or fact-checking service is so ridiculous when so many of us see kind of obvious lies being pumped out by the BBC on a daily basis. I mean, even just recently, they have declared a male footballer to be the women's sport person. Yeah, the women's sport person of the year. I mean, even just the whole, just alone, trans issue itself just exposes how insane the idea of having a fact-checking service at BBC is, because they are still representing kind of rapists and sexual offenders as trans women, or even sometimes just women, and I know people will say, oh, it's because of the laws, it's because of the Equality Act, they don't want to be sued and they can't, but there are ways around it. You could say a man who identifies as transgender, there are ways that they could, make it clearer. But of course, within the Israel-Palestine issue as well, we've seen so much in the last several months. I mean, it wasn't that long ago there was an attack on a hospital in Gaza. The BBC immediately came out and said it was an Israeli attack. Actually turned out to be a rocket that was misfired. And we've seen loads of examples of that. Even the recent attacks in Amsterdam, where Jews were essentially being, hunted down. Literally there were Jew hunts. People were being asked to show their passports. And the BBC headline was saying something along the lines of community clashes or community tensions. We keep getting these word tensions and clashes. I'll be specifying exactly what happened. I think many of us have felt, I mean, obviously the BBC has been, we've been saying this about the BBC for a long time, but I think in the last year it's become so apparent that it's just totally biased. Even in its dramas, you think, well, at least with its dramas they can't get facts from, but they're doing all this kind of casting with, historical figures that we know would have been white, and they're putting in black actors. So you just cannot trust the BBC at all with anything. So the idea of them having this service is just ridiculous.
Yeah. Is it the case that they are there to, check any story, or is it just purely BBC output?
I think it's any story, isn't it? I think they, for instance, they've got this young person, Mariana Spring, I think she's called. She's about 28, and she is the arbiter of truth for social media. So it's anything. This is nothing new, of course. Our own Heresy series, Robin Aitken, did a brilliant film about BBC bias a few years ago. It was one of the highlights of their Ems series. It's just difficult to take a fact-checking service by the BBC seriously when the kinds of people like Mariana Spring who are checking the facts actually think facts are right-wing.
Okay.
So if you look at the ethos of the BBC and you think about where they're coming from, which is essentially an identity politics ethos, so it's not just about the everyday getting things wrong. It's not even about bias. It's much more deep-rooted than that. It's a very deep cultural, ideological thing that we've been talking about for years and years, and now people are beginning to see how ridiculous it is. The good thing about this is that journalists themselves, the industry, this is a laughing stock in the industry. The idea that the BBC are fact-checking is ludicrous to proper journalists. I think like people like Alison Pearson for it, though.
Actually, Mariana Spring, she's the one who actually told the lie on her
On the CV, yes. Allegedly, yeah. To embellish her CV, it claimed that she worked personally with Sarah Rainsford, who was a BBC Moscow correspondent, and it was turned out she just met you on a couple of parties.
But if you look at this, though, I mean, it seems to me that this is all part and parcel of this new trend for disinformation checking. You know, I mean, it's right across the board. I believe that BBC Verified it, I believe, actually worked with this now discredited outfit. That it was global disinformation or something. Or rather, should I say, just in case they're watching and they want to sue, apparently they were being used by the British government but no longer are. But it's part of this, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and look, let's be clear here. There is a lot of disinformation that's coming out, both from the left and the right. There's a lot of information there which does need to be fact-checked. I like to think of myself as a fact-checker. When I go on to debate these ridiculous notions, the left part of it is actually to expose that the lack of any knowledge or educational net part on the topics they're talking about. Because as we often say, we're living in a post-truth society where there are apparently multiple truths, whereas, of course, there is only one truth, and but the people you speak to so often are motivated by feelings rather than facts. So we must always hang on to the importance of facts here. The problem, of course, as Philip brilliantly highlighted there, is in the type of people who are doing the fact checking. Because, of course, there are 60 people employed doing this at the BBC, right? So we're paying for these 60 people. And at a time and resources are so slender at that institution, are we getting value for money? Because most of these people are actually very young. And they bring with it all of the naivety and, of course, the biases of being young. But also, we don't know what sources they're using to verify facts. Are these things being peer reviewed? Who's being peer reviewed? Do they go up an editorial ladder to get technical points? There's so much stuff that we don't understand and we don't know about. And it seems the only way you could probably get any sort of real fact checker is to have, a panel of sort of, 3 people from the right, 3 from the left, in order to try to reach some sort of compromise. And I doubt very much that you've got anybody from the Telegraph or the Spectator being employed by the BBC to assist in the fact-checking of any of this material. That's why it's so insidious and so dangerous. And it's also in the omission of things. So Amy pointed out about the way that they style transgender people, but it's also the case of not actually saying that someone is transgendered. So we had the journal of this murderer, stage name Scarlett Blake. Never was it pointed out that this person was transgender, was being posed as being a female. It's in the act of omission that actually you're causing even greater damage as well. Let alone the fact that we saw that BBC Verify will always go after Israeli issues, but will leave aside the Hamas and so forth. In much the same way, of course, that you saw during the presidential debates in America. Donald Trump at the live debates fact-checked so many more times than Kamala Harris was during those debates.
And will take witness statements and independent verification about Israeli actions in the Middle East. Push it away and question it to death, but will take Hamas information as gospel. And we've seen that time and time again. Amy pointed that out. But just again, as Amy pointed out, the trans thing is such a good way of looking at this for what it is. I mean, we've got the female footballer of the year who fell at the first stage with testosterone, too high testosterone. This was in Africa. So the Africans said, no, hang on, this person doesn't qualify as a woman. But over here, this person does. Or I would say this person does. And of course, the BBC present this person as a woman.
I mean, it was about a month ago where there was over 200 staff at the BBC wrote a letter to the head, Tim Davies, saying that they were very upset about its pro-Israel bias. So the people saying that they're not going hard enough on Israel. They need to change the headlines to show that Israel are the perpetrator. They need to make sure that Israel politicians are scrutinized more. So you see that the BBC is put in a very difficult position where both the left and the right are saying you're too impartial.
Well, that's sort of states, though, Amy, isn't it? Yeah, because if they're both saying that, they can say, well, look, we're doing it.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
We're also talking about the way that BBC reports things. particularly egregious thing about this verify is its very name. It's meant to be checking the stories. I mean, the one that you mentioned earlier about the farmers, I think the person who was writing it didn't know the difference between an acre and a hectare. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, it's absurd. But the thing is as well, whether it's a BBC Verify or whether it is the reporting of news, the biggest bias is not necessarily in the stories. It's actually in the stories they don't report. It's in the omissions. Is it?
Yeah, and I guess Southport could be an example of that. I mean, they actually came out at the time of the Southport murders and said there's been rumours going around that the murderer is Muslim, and this is this is just a rumour, it's not true. And now he's looking like it probably is true. But that's an example of their own misinformation. They're pumping out their own misinformation. So it's just absurd. This whole verify is totally absurd. Well, with every story now, you have to read between the lines, and you have to work out what exactly is going on.
Well, people have actually, there's a whole lingo, isn't there, on social media, when something actually means something else. Now, I wonder, Deb, what do you feel, what do you feel collectively about, you said we can't really have an impartial service anymore. Maybe actually there wasn't. Maybe that's why. What would you do? Would you actually scrap the license fee, for example, as a start?
You need to scrap the license fee now. It took me a long time to come to that decision and realization. And it's simply got to the point now where I think the BBC is incurable. There is no way to get it back onto a footing where it represents everyone who's paying that license fee. That's fundamentally it. So many people feel offended by BBC coverage. Why should they pay for it? I think purely on those grounds, it's indefensible. I do want a state broadcaster because I think that a state broadcaster is able to do things that a commercial service would never be able to do. The sort of coverage we get for great ceremonial events or the D-Day, 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy, that's the stuff that commercial broadcasters don't cover. Or even documentaries about Stonehenge or, all these sorts of things, Peterloo Massacre and so forth. These are things which, I watched them on BBC 4. I'm sorry, these are very good non-political documentaries. And this has come to anybody who watched BBC 4, which unfortunately may be one of the victims of cutbacks, will say that there is some value to the BBC, but it's in non-political output, and documentaries on historical subjects still, remarkably, have become still free from that. Particularly if you go back in their back catalogue. But I would like some sort of state broadcaster that has a mandate just to do what Lord Reith said, which is to inform, educate, entertain, which is free from that political bias. That I mean creating some new form of state broadcaster with a very narrow remit of what it covers. But I would like to see that because that's one of the only ways in which you could hopefully have some sort of national culture reaching out to people, because otherwise there's very little left now where we can actually unite as a people. And there's very few ways in which people can learn about the history of this culture, of this country, is not being taught in our schools. And so having some output there nationally, I think is important for great events. But of course, I don't think there's much chance of having an impartial service in the future, the way things are.
I think the license fee acts as a kind of regressive tax, okay? And I think it does so because of what you said, Peter. It's what is not included. So the whole thing isn't about facts. It is based in truth. It is about narratives. It's like everything else in our world, isn't it? It's about narratives. It's about how you construct a story. And unfortunately, the way they are constructing the story of our nation, it's omitting people like us. It's omitting white people, isn't it, on television? It's certainly omitting conservatives. It's omitting older people. And for those people to have, this is two-tier stuff again, isn't it? But those people to have to pay the license fee, then that is absolutely and utterly wrong. And that's why now I refuse to do it. Just in terms of the archive, which I think is very important, I think that's a superb thing to have. But I'm not sure how long those documentaries that you're talking about in terms of live being made, I don't know how long they'll carry on.
Well, that's actually a really important point. The stuff we're talking about, which I would agree with, but most of them are old, or should I say a few years old.
But I still want, you're true, but what I'm saying is I would like an alternative state broadcast is what I'm saying, and an idea to provide it's a very basic skeleton type of thing. It's limited in itself to events of national importance and things designed to actually celebrate Britain and its culture. You would have hoped the Conservative Party would have been able to, Thatcher tried to do that when she brought in Marmaduke, or whatever his name was, Marmaduke Hussey, tried to try and bring that in. But the archives are wonderful. Now I find myself watching old Michael Parkinson interviews. Yeah, it's a great race. I'm just really watching old stuff because I can't bear to watch so much new stuff. But when there are new documentaries on the BBC dealing with non-political subjects, they are excellent. And it's that sort of quality which is still impartial that I think it's such a shame that's not broader than that. But there still is some quality output coming out.
How would one, you just said pursue this bit, because we're trying to be constructive, I guess. How would one pay for it? So we don't want license fee anymore. So you want this state broadcaster that's going to bring you to big events. And I can sort of see the logic of that. How would it be paid for, if not by some form of tax?
Well, firstly, it would be overseas sales was up for one thing. Having a subscription service overseas, I don't know why the BBC haven't been doing that. If you go abroad and you're in your hotel, you can't watch anything on the BBC. You can't access BBC iPlayer. There's every reason you could bring in some sort of sponsorship and commercial enterprise into that in between programs, rather than PBS also does this in America, where they have their fundraising drive. Or elsewhere in the world, they just have general taxation comes and pays for it. Whereas you're not being forced to pay a license fee, but it just comes out in general taxation. There are also some different models there could be.
Yes, it's still a problem. I remember that there was an idea when arts programming was, because a lot it's just not made very much anymore.
CBC in Canada is just as woke as the BBC, and it's also terrible. But their funding is their commercials during their programs, and they have general taxation as well comes in.
Do you think that the BBC, with these big events, I immediately think Queen's funeral, coronation, and I guess you've got to include other big things like general elections. That's like, do the BBC still? Are they resting on their laurels? Have always people turned to the BBC? I've got a bit of accent in me. I have something, but apparently Sky, for example, is very, very good at these things. They have very, very good, authentic, authoritative voices.
Alistair Bruce, that's what
I'm afraid. So it's getting slimmer. And also, I start into my subject. I watch Netflix a lot, and their documentaries are just brilliant. And they're not the BBC. And the drama, The Crown, the BBC would never make The Crown.
But the state opening of Parliament, Trooping the Colour, Sky don't cover those things as far as I'm aware.
Oh, you mean like the whole ceremony?
But there's not just ceremonial events. The amount of coverage, the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landing, London's covered, round-the-clock sort of coverage. That's the sort of thing that commercial enterprises don't do. The Remembered Sunday services, all those sorts of stuff, I still think that. I am an old, nostalgic traditionalist. Yeah, I do long for the days of Richard Dimbleby's of covering it. The BBC went through a terrible period from the Golden Jubilee to the Diamond Jubilee when they were each to be given with pets. Now, what is your view of the Jubilee? All these silly vox pops. Sex toys. It was ridiculous. I think they've learned the lesson from that. It's still not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was, 10 or 15 years ago.
But if you're talking about the BBC, it's not just the programming, it's the personnel, isn't it? It's the presenters as well. So I think you alluded to this last week or the week before. I think, yes, I'm nostalgic and traditional for these kinds of things, and I kind of want to stay broadcaster, but I'm also aware that you can get brilliant documentaries online in all different kinds of places. And I'm thinking about our own channel, like The West, for example, the reaction to The West. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on television. I think it's people like us and we are stepping up, and it's right that we should step up.
And I think it is just those moments like the coronation or a general election where I still prefer to watch the BBC. There's something about it that I still have that nostalgia for it. I mean, of course I don't, because I don't pay the license fee, so I don't watch it, but I would. But it's a slim down state broadcaster, I think, that just did the very basics, and you could rely on them for those basics would be very good, and I would pay for that. I refuse now, given how insane the BBC's gone, I would refuse now to pay any money to it.
I think what we're all talking about is a generational thing, isn't it? So it's what we were brought up with. We all have at least one television in our houses. Now, of course, young people, and certainly the young people I've taught over the last 10 years or so, they don't own the television. The idea of having a television in the sitting room is quite alien to them. So again, I think this is a generational thing, and I think this attachment to the BBC, my God, flawed as it is, this attachment to the BBC is going to go over time. So not only are they in terrible trouble with people like us, the future's incredibly bleak for them.
I think that's a good point there about Hugh Edwards, because if you watch there, for example, they do all runs on Top of the Pops on BBC4. How are they going to, in the future, broadcast, repeats of the Coronation Service? There's already documentaries, because his voice overlays so much of it.
Yes. Can you see the comments, can't you, with me? But do watch it again. You can hear the comments that they're going to be making. Well, anyway, it's to be continued, but I would say it would be extraordinary if the BBC lasted out its next charter. Moving swiftly on, we've seen what seems to be a resumption of the ASBO system.
Yes, the next step in controlling our activities is come out with the announcement of these so-called respect orders, which are essentially a sort of continuation of the ASBOs brought in by Tony ASBO's antisocial behavior orders, which were then discarded. But of course, we've seen this sort of, we've had ASBOs, we've had under Blair, we had under Cameron, we had the nudge unit was created. And then, of course, we saw the creation of these non-crime hate incidents and now respect orders, as libertarians to say, and free speech lovers. This is just the next step along this march. Respect orders essentially allow the police to impose restrictions on people who are conducting themselves in an antisocial way in public spaces, whether they be on drugs or just, or causing mayhem or a disturbance of some variety or others. And if they do go back, if they break those restrictions, they can get 2 years in prison. Now, of course, on the face of it, that sounds quite good because, of course, so many town centres are blighted by antisocial behaviour, public transport. We know what we're talking about. We've seen all that sort of stuff, which makes decent people scared to go about their duties, about their daily business. So on the surface, it seems like a very big thing. Until you look into detail, this doesn't apply to youth. And of course, the youth are the main instigators, really, of most of this stuff. This is called, ASBOs for adults. This is how it's being prevented. And anybody who's been on a bus in London during school leaving hour, is just as bad as being in some war zone, these things are terrible. And the fact that they're admitting all of that makes you wonder what the general purpose is here. Who are they going to be targeting here? And that's where the issue lies. Will they be targeting people that you and I and our viewers would identify as troublemakers? Or is this going to be yet another form of the non-crime hate incidents where actually they're too scared to go after who they should be going after, but be going after decent people who've had a dispute with their neighbours, and there are all sorts of areas, rather than targeting the people that should be targeted by us.
I think, surely one of the things with the differences maybe with the respect order is that it's not, it's the police would react to it. It wouldn't necessarily be reported by somebody else. It's not a question of someone coming and saying, he's just, basically...
Yeah, there doesn't necessarily have to be a victim. Yeah. So there was it's not the respect thing, but it's a very similar thing. So there was an Asian guy joking with his friend, and he said his friend looked like a terrorist. Okay. His friend laughed. Someone overheard it, reported it, and it was logged as an non-crime hate incident.
That's right, yes, yeah. But the thing is that this is one, I want to read out the definition, because if they are linked, of a non-crime hate incident. Here we go. I won't read it all. Basically, College of Policing, which is a guideline sets for the police forces. College of Policing states that it is any incident where a crime has not been committed, but where it is perceived by the reporting person or any other person that the incident was motivated by hostility or prejudice based on, and then it goes through the usual characteristics, race, section, all the rest of it. But the thing is, you see, this seems to me, before we move on to immediately, to be slightly different to these suspect orders.
Yes, and on the face of it, I can understand the logic here, but do we trust the police to actually enact them the way that we want to see them enacted? Because I'm a great subscriber to the broken window theory of cities, which Mayor Bloomberg in New York brought into great effect, the idea being if there's a broken window on a building, then slowly and gradually there'll be more broken windows and the area will fall into decay. You'll get antisocial behavior and then you'll get criminal behavior. And so by trying just to clean up cities, towns and villages so that they seem far safer, you will actually end up making other crimes and other things less likely to happen. So I understand it on that level. But the key thing here, of course, is our police are already under-resourced. So how are they going to be? How will they be able to police this matter as well? Also, if you break your respect order, you can have yourself up to 2 years in jail. Well, our jails are already full. Far more sensible, in my view, actually, to have these respect orders if the real people are getting them, to have them doing community service and have them cleaning up our streets, have them, washing off graffiti, have them repairing things that they've broken, other people have broken, contributing back to society rather than being a drain and the taxpayer. That would seem very logical.
It's just so worrying because if you think about shoplifting, for it's something like 90% of shoplifting just goes unpunished. They don't even bother. They don't even start, But the broader context is actually quite annoying. I fully agree with you, Rafe, there about the broken window theory. But if you think about what else is happening, so if you think about grooming gangs, for example, if you think about real crime, if you think about, I think particularly about sexual crimes here that we talked about on this show quite a lot, all of this stuff not only goes unpunished, but there is a blind spot as to the nature of the perpetrators. So we're dealing with a lot of this stuff, which will be ideological or etiquette, and some of it will be absolutely absurd, like some of the non-crime stuff that's already happened. Like one person had a large pair of soiled underpants hanging on the line and was reported, and all of the rest of it. So some of this stuff is absolutely absurd, but the really serious stuff, which is at the heart of everything we talk about every week here, just goes not only unpunished, but ignored.
I think it's for me, it feels a very worrying development because it feels almost as though the respect orders are there or will be brought in to crack down, but in a very petty way on behaviour, on the same way that non-prime hate incidents are to crack down on people's speech in a very petty way. To me, the two will go hand in hand, where you're going to get anything you say or do now can be logged as some kind of crime. I mean, even in relation to these, I think we've got community protection notices now. That was kind of brought in after the ASPO. And even they were far less, they could be dished out far easily than the ASPO could. Like you had to go through quite a lot of hoops to get an ASPO. Whereas now you can get, I would imagine these respect orders when they're brought in, they could be applied quite easily. And you see things like, there was examples of people playing their TV too loud, people letting their gardens become too overgrown, very small things that people could be done that could be kind of seen as a problem. Whereas, as Philip was saying, we've got a massive crime issue in London and across the country, very, very serious crimes. And it seems to me that a vet keeper's way of managing that is to just punish people for small misdemeanors, whether it's in the behaviour or in their speech, and to ignore the far bigger issues that we are facing as a country.
Although, slightly begs to differ with you guys on this, actually, because the ASPOs came in the early part of the century, if you remember. Yeah. And they were a response, first of all, to a real panic about breakdown in social order, which was powerful. But also, they're in response to the complete disappearance of what you might call peer pressure or respectability. All those things which are basically called bourgeois, which were thrown out. Decency, curb twitching is awful now, all of that. But in fact, it was, the way that people would behave to each other, like neighbours. You mentioned neighbours. Yeah. It's absolutely living hell. And I think that's much more common. People have just got used to it now. I suppose I'm just adding to the problem. But I mean, I do think there is a place for something. You almost have to fund people back into good behaviour. I get, dare I say it,
It's the Singapore model. There's, Lee Kuan Yew wanted to create British society in Singapore, but the only way you can make Singaporeans into British people is by strict laws, harsh discipline and sentences. And unfortunately, as I said before, I think we need to bring some of that over here because the British people are no longer the stereotypically traditional British person, and we need to actually enforce our values and our moral and our moral.
But how do you do that when the police are so captured? We know you got two team policing. We talk about it here on the time.
And this is ultimately, you've got to think about motivation, and this is about control. This is not trying to, in the way that you've just said, make things better for everybody, a universal try to make this place better. Yeah. This is targeting particular groups of people. This is about control. And this is being done in the face of real pushback against this kind of Stasi, militant left-wing government. People are absolutely sick of it. I mean, we've had this petition this last week, whatever you think about that petition, people are registering absolutely their discontent at the police state and the cruelty that goes along with it as well.
The thing is, sorry, to push my point here, the thing is, you mentioned public transport, that's a real flash behavior, isn't it? And it's because people are together. So what are the things basically absolutely drive people down and really make people feel demoralized? No, lack of QA. Lack of QA. Huge, noisy music or very loud, profane conversations on the train. Yes, like that. Worst of all, in my bugbear was people putting filthy shoes up on seats that people have got to sit on. Now, all of those things happen when society is basically kind of losing it.
Can I add another one to that as well, which is the smell of cannabis, weed in city centres, in streets, everywhere. Right. And this is something that completely goes unpunished. It's still illegal. It's a Class B drug, but no one ever gets punished for it. In where I live, I saw a young guy smoking a joint, actually walked past a parked police car with two policemen there. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, I think, I suppose that what I'm saying about this really is that this is sort of fundamentally different. I don't mean to make too much of it from what we're talking about with Higgins. It is basically where the idea that you worried about what people thought of you around. Yeah. Has entirely disappeared.
That's why I'm supportive of the concept, but how it's going to be implemented, that's my problem issue, particularly given the fact that there'll be the police and government will be reluctant to have the stats come out to show that black and Muslim people are arrested not arrested, but get these respect orders at a far higher rate. Something they're going to be overcompensating and trying to find white people to give these to. It's better them a much lower on a much lower bar.
You mentioned Yvette Cooper a bit earlier. She apparently was going to lower the bar on these non-crime hate incidents even further, but then sort of basically shuffled back into her box because of Alison Pearson and what happened there. But it is quite extraordinary. I've only been looking at the number of these things. Have you got any stats on that? I mean, they have hugely increased. This fellow Harry Miller, that we've had on the show so many times on this channel, great guy. I think a lot of people were under the impression that this was God, but apparently, obviously, it was not.
65 NCHIs are recorded every day at 17,000 or up in the age of June or something like that.
Yes, and so therefore, I don't even know whether you've been recorded. But I mean, if you remember from the definition I just read out, it is basically the victim. They're called a victim immediately. There should be the complainant. That is very nice, right? It's victim or anybody else. So as you say, it could be anyone you tell. Do you know what this guy said to me the other day? And then your friend could go and report it. So this whole subjectivity has to be taken out, surely. With that in mind, what did you think of reform? Or actually of Nigel, who announced on Twitter that all hate speech crimes and everything, all hate crimes will be gone under reform. I thought that was actually very good, very well.
Yeah, very good.
It was one of our pledges. Yeah. Remember our pledge on our pledge?
Yeah, I mean, Harry Miller is actually rearrested this week for misgendering someone online. I mean, and luckily, I mean, and the case of Alison Pearson, I mean, it has brought all of this, back into light again in a way that's quite positive, actually. And luckily, the case against her has been dropped. But I think as Rafe said, I think, what is it? 9 people are arrested every day for things they say online, and every day, and then 65 people at non-crime hate citizens locked against them, every day. It's just getting worse and worse. And you are seeing MPs actually across the political spectrum. It's not just Reform, and there are some Labour MPs coming out and saying, this enough is enough. This is going too far. I think a lot of people are noticing that there is a problem here because their side are now having some of them, it's turned on them a little bit. So I think it just seems to me like a no-brainer as a policy to get rid of this. But you do wonder what's going through Yvette Cooper's mind, that she would want to roll back on the guidelines brought in by sort of Braverman and make it, liberalise it essentially. See that anybody, and they every time they do that, they always mention Islamophobia. They always say, particularly in relation to Islamophobia, we need to be very strict on this, and that's very, very well.
And they've added something else as well. Now it's, as of today, actually, Kiszely, Islamophobia in all its forms.
No, really?
Yeah, so that means criticism, any kind of criticism, all its forms.
So ban the burqa. If we had a show on here saying, should we ban the burqa? Yeah.
Ban of child marriage, criticism of incest, cousin marriage, terrorism, criticism of grooming gangs even.
And the really insidious thing about this is with Alison Pearson and I think with Harry Miller as well, they're always historical things now. So people like us who tweet all the time or on the show, we're just waiting. I'm waiting for a knock on the door. And so many people out there are feeling the same. And it's that sense of tension that's building in this country. It is like a pressure.
Actually, we were discussing this last night, weren't we? In fact, we think, actually, why haven't they actually offered it said so far? I mean, not trying to give you ideas or anything, but we're not worried about that. We'll carry on saying what we say. I think that's it for this week, unless you have for any other issues. Thank you very much for watching. We are actually going to carry on just for a few more minutes for our members, a bit of exclusive material. But anyway, I hope you have a very good week, and please do watch our split lecture with Ayaan Hirsi Ali tomorrow, Sunday at 10 o'clock. So it's great. Thank you very much.